Welcome back, and now we're going to have a look at the plugin itself. But first, a couple more points that we need to make. Now, you may recall that when we did the measurement phase, we had to use 48K as the sampling rate. Now, unlike that, the plugin itself can be used at sampling rates up to and including 96K. So there's no fix on 48K here. But there is a little bit of fine print. The TDM version can only support a stereo instance at 48K due to the amount of available power on a single TDM XL chip. So to solve that problem at 96K, you just need to run a linked multi-mono version of the plugin, and that spreads it over 2 chips and totally solves that problem. So apart from that, all the native versions up to 96K, not a problem. Now let's have a look at the plugin itself. So as you can see, I've inserted it here as the last insert on my stereo master auxiliary that I've created. And there it is. So just to reiterate that, the way the plugin works is it needs to appear as the very last thing after any bus processing or whatever you've done. It's the very last thing before the sound goes out to your speakers. And that's the correct way to use it. So there's no processing after the ARC. Now, as you can see here, there's a little chart of my Dynaudio Craft monitors. And let's explain how this works here. The orange part, so it's this orange line here, that's representing how the measurement phase analysed these speakers. So you can see a few boosts and troughs in that response. The white line here, designated after, is the response after the ARC plugin has done its magic. Now, obviously, it can't give you an absolute rule of flat response due to all sorts of weird natures of physics that it can't break, but it can make improvements, and those improvements are shown by the white line there, and you can see it's vastly more flat than the orange line before it. The green line here is the target, and of course the target is a dead flat line. In this case, it's a dead flat line because our target here is saying flat. But we'll look at this option in just a little bit because there are other choices here apart from flat. So just to reiterate, the orange is what our speakers were analysed at. The white line is what the software has turned our speakers into and what improvements it's made, and that's up against a green target line, which in this case is dead flat. So here under this measurement pop-up are the various measurements that I've taken. Now in this case, the one you're looking at is the very first attempt I made at analysing these speakers. But I'll click here and you'll see that I have actually made some other ones. So I've just named them fairly roughly. Dynaudio Craft being this first one. Dynes Take 2, so that was my second attempt. Dynes with J is where I used somebody here with me just to make sure I was doing things exactly right. We tried a few different choices, so we did one together. Then later I did a software upgrade to version 1.12, which as of this speaking is the current version. Before that I actually was using a different version. So just to take advantage of the improvements in that version, we did the measurements again. And this is not actually in chronological order, it's alphabetical. Just recently I've got some Event Opal speakers just over the last week. So I've analysed those as well. And if I click here, you'll see a totally different response. That's the closest picture I could get to what they look like, but that's not them. Down here, some NS10s, which a lot of people, of course, will have, and you'll see that response, again, very, very different. And the last one was what we did in our little measurement phase, test ignore, which can be really ignored because have a look at this. It'll be wild because, as I said, the microphone was just sitting in one space, completely off axis the entire time. So I've completely confused things, and that was only for illustrative purposes. So let's go back to the first one. And you can see now, I'll just jump between the different Dynaudio responses I took. Now that one's actually pretty flat. I mean, we've got a little dip here in the low mids, but it's not too bad, I think. If we jump to the next one, now I'm going to cover up this left-hand side. So maybe keep your eye just on the right channel for now, while I switch from here to take 2. Right, and there's little changes there. And what's interesting in this next one is the bottom end. Have a look at this. I'm going to switch to Dynes with J. Now watch the low end over here on this channel. Bang, it jumps up. I don't precisely know why that would have happened because I've got a subwoofer in this setup and it's the same subwoofer set to the same level for all those measurements, but this explains how important it is to do the measurements properly because for some reason that subwoofer boost there didn't show up in my previous measurement. So I haven't exactly got an accurate reason as to why that is. But then when we got the new version of the software, 1.12, so this is the one I would trust the most because that's where all the optimizations have been made. It's back down again to a normal level, which is where I kind of thought it should be. I haven't got the sub set up to hype, so I think it should be pretty much that look there. So anyway, as you can see, you do the measurements very carefully using different setups as well. Because the other thing was this very first one, the Dynaudio Craft, I was using example 3 from the guide, which is the one that has the client couch at the back being analysed in the same pass. And as I'd said, after talking to the guys from IK, they actually recommended I go and treat my room, even as though it has the client couch and the rack area behind the console and all those things, they still said I should just treat that as example 1, which is the more simple, just around the main listening position in front of the console. And so that example 1 is what I settled on finally down here with this one. And I think that's why it's quite flat. If we're just going to get a little bit more analytical, what's interesting here is I have these Dynaudio speakers set back a fair bit because they're in a 5.1 configuration. Of course, here we've only measured the left and right stereo, but they're set back a bit from the console in free space. And I think that makes them a little bit more accurate. Because the Event Opals, let's have a look at those. And to my ears, they sound much better. They sound tremendous. I would heartily recommend them. But for this measurement, I had them much closer, right on the bridge of the console. And I get a feeling that this hyping this here is just literally from the proximity of them, this hype in the low mid there, and this dip here in the sort of right in the middle on both channels there, but different in both channels, is I would guess the sound coming off the console getting distorted in that respect. So we're getting a comparatively weird mid-range and this boom in the back here. And I know that boom in the back's just from proximity because when I roll my seat back about half a foot, that boom to my own ears disappears. So you have to be really careful with this stuff. And doing this analysis has actually prodded me to get the best sound I can in my room with the naked ear by moving back and forth, possibly sitting the speakers back a little bit or whatever, then doing this analysis again and almost using the analysis as a tool just to get my placement right before even using the ARC to do what the ARC is supposed to do. So, because look at the NS10 response I got. And again, they were very close to me as well. And again, they've got a big dip here in this sort of mid-range, and then this little honk here, I presume, is the NS10 kind of honk anyway. So that'll be NS10s no matter what happens. Interesting here that it happens very differently on the right channel than it does to the left. Now that I'm putting down to the fact that I'm using a Digi-Icon console here that has a 20-inch Apple monitor kind of in a not brilliant position, as a lot of you who have seen the Digi-Icon consoles and where they recommend that the computer screen sits is not actually in a very good position. It's a little bit off center. So I'm kind of very conscious of that when I'm monitoring. But I think what's happening here is this right channel is getting a little bit more influenced by that because the computer screen is off a little bit to the right. So the right channel's wearing that a little bit. Left channel gets a bit of a freer run and is just showing this 2K bump, which is very typical of NS10s. So anyway, let's go back to the top. We'll sit on these Dynaudio Crafts and we'll have a little discussion about what this target curve is all about. Now the flat response, which is the default, is very close to flat, but to protect your system, it won't extend the bottom end below your system's limits. This makes a lot of sense. So, you know, if you've got some NS10s and the bottom end of your speakers starts rolling off at, let's just say 60 Hertz, you don't really want ARC pushing it back up at 50 Hertz and trying to create this bottom end that's missing. On top of anything else, it will cause distortion because those speakers can't accurately produce that frequency at that level. So, you know, apart from any damage it might do to the speakers themselves, it won't be the correct thing to listen to anyway because the speakers will not cope with it and just start distorting. So flat's attempting to be as flat as possible, but it's not going to force a bottom end on your speakers that they can't manage. Now the next option here is high frequency roll off 1. Now keep your eye on the green curve now, which is the target, and now it's got a roll off there. So I'll just go back to flat and the green goes dead flat, as you can see. If I go to HF roll off 1, boom, it dives down. Now, IK recommends going through some CDs and reference material that you know really, really well through your system and messing with these target curves. And the recommendation basically is that if you think that the flat setting sounds a little too bright in your room, try this setting with the roll-off. I mean, this might happen if you've got a small or medium-sized room and you've got nasty reflections that are pinging around the place. I mean, no amount of ARC is going to be able to get rid of that. This is just to make the experience a little less fatiguing. Okay, the next target, flat mid compensation. And you can see now it's kind of the anti-NS10 in a way. The green target line is now ducking down here around 2K. And this setting is really to address, say, crossover problems or for horn-loaded speakers that have too much bite around 2K. And the final setting here is pretty much a combination of just the previous two. So it's a high-frequency roll-off and the mid-compensation. And let's look at the green target line there. And we've got the roll-off on the top end there and the dip around 2K. So for all intents and purposes, flat should be okay in most cases, but these other choices are there in case tailoring is required. That'll do for this movie, and I'll see you in the next tutorial for a continuation of these features.